Welcome back. This is Chris, my brother in Christ, Stephen.
Welcome back.
The date today is January 22nd, year of our Savior, 2023. And the title of this video is going to be called Revelation chapter 8, B as in Bravo. Yes. Continuing. Remember that Rome was destroyed in three parts. One of them was the Huns. The Huns kept moving in and spreading out. By 432 AD, they were collecting a large annual tribute from the Rome as a bribe to keep them from coming further west. Remember that Israel had a flood. Satan poured a flood of people after Israel, and they fled to that wilderness, right? Well, this is what happens. The Huns, it is a flood of people. Couldn't stop them. Couldn't stop the Huns. They were unbelievable. Powerful, powerful people. So you see, they were collecting a large annual tribute from Rome as a bribe to keep them from coming further west. When Attila came to power in 440 AD, he spread out to the southward. He devastated an area from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. He defeated the Byzantine Empire, Theodosius II, in three terrific, desperate battles. He even besieged Constantinople, but he wasn't trained in siege warfare, and he had none of the weapons necessary for besieging the walled city. So he finally had to abandon the siege. Theodosius, however, ceded to him a large amount of territory south of the Danube, which put it on the southwestern side, and Theodosius also paid a large annual tribute to the Huns to keep them from coming back to Constantinople. Then in 451 AD, in an alliance with Genseric, the king of the Vandals, he resumed his march westward. He invaded Gaul, which is France. Remember, in those days, you didn't have so much of a national identity as we understand it today. It wasn't a nation, it was a kingdom. It was ruled by a king, and it did what the king wanted to do. If the king decided to make war against some of their blood relatives, he led his nation out to war against him. Now here, Genseric had led his Vandals out of Gaul through Spain into Africa, and he knew that some of his fellow Germanic tribes were there. But that didn't matter. He was out for loot. As long as he could reward his warriors with the loot of conquered places, he kept the army loyal to him. They invaded Gaul and got as far as Chalons in France, where the Romans were assisted at this time by the Visigoths and the Visigoth king Theodoric I. The combined Roman and Visigoth force engaged in probably the most terrific battle in all history. Historians of that day say that over 200,000 Huns were killed in that battle. Now, I admit that was probably an exaggerated estimate, but even so, it ranks as one of the greatest, if not the greatest of all battles of ancient history. So in 451 AD, they were turned back, and the Visigoths and Roman forces pursued them back to the Rhine River. They had not only a good deal of the area of the Rhine, but of course, they occupied all the way south up to the headquarters of the Rhine up near Switzerland. If they didn't stop them, you would have Mongol people in Europe today, ladies and gentlemen. You wouldn't have an Israelite kingdom today. In the mountains that had their start up to that region, you come into the headwaters of the Danube, and then as they pour down into Italy, you come to the river Po. The river Po has its headwaters in the great mountain ridge that runs north-south down Italy, and it flows in a generally easterly direction until it empties into the Adriatic Sea. So here, these three great rivers with the three subwaters, the fountains of water, were covered by this terrible blight of the Hun invasion. A blight it was. It was Attila's boast that, quote, the grass never grew again where his horse's hooves have trod, end quote. And that's about what he did to the land that he went through. Total devastation. Completely senseless. They didn't know whether they wanted to stay and keep the land or whether they wanted to move on. So they devastated it until it was in such a condition that there was no point in their trying to stay there. In 452 AD, Attila invaded Italy and advanced on the city of Rome. But before he got there, the Romans sent a deputation out to meet him. The emperor offered an enormous tribute bribe to spare the city, and Pope Leo I went along as part of the embassy. His diplomatic efforts are credited with probably being the persuasive thing that caused Attila to turn back. Anyway, Rome was spared from being occupied by the Huns, but the next year, 453, Attila died while he was preparing another attack on Rome, and the death of Attila broke up the Hun invasion. You notice how you have a transition. You have the death, the declining of pagan Rome, and then you have the commencement and the beginning of papal Rome. You notice that the Pope was out there. The Pope, the Vicar of Christ, the Pontifex Maximus, is being increased. And so that's where you get that transition of that deadly wound being healed in papal Rome, where now the Pope becomes the Pontifex Maximus. Go ahead, my brother.
Well, Attila the Hun, the one of the famous quotes that he said was, where I have passed, the grass will never grow again. I mean, he wreaked havoc everywhere. As a matter of fact,
he was wormwood. It was a great example of bitter wormwood. He conquered all these areas and made it bitter, and it just so many people died.
He was known as Flagellum Deo, which means the scourge of God in Latin.
And he was.
Flagellum Deo. He murdered his own brother and became sole ruler, and
absolutely ruthless.
Ruthless, extremely ruthless.
Yeah. Well,
continue. He procreated probably with 1,000 women everywhere he went.
There's a lot of people probably related to him.
Probably they said the Eastern Europe, 1 in 5 has Attila's blood in him.
In Eastern Europe.
That guy was he was a busy guy. He was war and love.
There was no semen retention with him.
None.
Okay, all right.
None.
All right, so anyway, Rome was spared from being occupied by the Huns, but the next year, 453, Attila died while he was preparing another attack on Rome, and the death of Attila broke up the Hun invasion. Yeah. He was the one chieftain who could hold them all together. When he was gone, the other chiefs who were willing to serve under him were not willing that one of their own number should rise to a position of supremacy. Each one said, well, I'm as important as he is. I should be the leader. With the result, nobody was able to be a leader, and the Huns finally moved back into the steppes of Central Asia. Not all of them, though. Some of them enlisted in the Roman army. Remember, by this time, Rome was entirely unable to maintain an effective army made up of Roman citizens, and she was hiring mercenary soldiers, mostly from the various Germanic tribes. But when some of the Huns were willing to enlist in the Roman forces, they were taken in. Thus, the third part of the rivers and the third part of the fountains and waters were occupied. And if ever an invasion was a bitter thing, this was it. The loss of life was extremely heavy. Many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. Now we go on to the fourth trumpet and Revelation chapter 8, verse 12. Revelation chapter 8, verse 12.
And the fourth angel sounded, and a third part of the sun was smitten, and a third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, so as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise.
Now these words are meaningless if you don't understand Genesis chapter 1, as we've talked about. 99% of Christians out there don't understand what the sun is, the moon. Those are the two great lights. They're in the firmament. There's only the sun, the moon, and the stars. That's what it is. And then you have the planets, which are wandering stars in 2 Kings chapter 23, right around 4. Read that whole chapter, because that's what this world's about. It's a satanic system. Josiah brought the house down, just like Jesus Christ is bringing this pagan empire down. This whole Satan system is coming down when he comes as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He's not coming as your Savior. This is the time to be saved. This is the time to accept the free gift. When he comes, it's going to come as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And you will know it because that scroll, that firmament is going to roll back like a scroll. So continuing, this pictures the extinguishment of the power and glory of the Western Roman Empire within 1 century. In 379 AD, the empire was split into the eastern and western portions. The western ruled from Rome and the eastern from Constantinople. Theodosius the Great ruled both halves from Constantinople between 392 and 395 AD. But thereafter, there were always the two separate portions of the Roman Empire. From about 400 AD, the provinces simply disintegrated into chaos and anarchy from the combination of the excessive taxation from Rome and the barbarian invasions. So we see in history, it says right here, in History of the Nations, Volume 4, you see right here, History of Nations, Volume 4. This is by Collier, Volume 4, pages 115 to 116, it says, of the condition during this period, quote, Gaul had suffered much from the incursions. France had suffered much from the incursions of the barbarians and from civil wars during the last half century. And this distress led to the insurrection of the Burgundians, or the rustic banditti. For several years, the country was overrun with troops of famished and furious marauders who attacked all property, and in the case of Autun, sacked and destroyed one of the chief centers of Gaulish or French civilization. The insurrection at length died out, but the imperial government failed to learn from it the urgent necessity of devising some less exhaustive system of taxation. End quote. So it has been the history of all important nations that they were not truly conquered by force from without. They collapsed from internal rottenness to the point where it wasn't too big a job to invade and conquer them from without. For a good century in the provinces, there was very little law or authority existing outside of the walled cities of Rome themselves. Do we see that going on today in America?
Yes, we do.
Same thing. You know, today we're weak by all the genetically modified food and the stuff that's being put in our body. We're so laden with all of these satanic doctrines and sexual immorality and just plain disobedience and rejection and hatred of God.
And we're kept broke.
Yes, we're kept broke. We're kept broke through the Federal Reserve System, which was created on Jekyll Island in secret by people who represent a quarter of the world's wealth.
And they do not represent America or the people of America.
No, they're rather bankers, and they represent the fallen angels and the priests of Satan. That's what they recommend. That you never hear about those people. So we see that power of Rome is shrinking from the great boundaries of the empire to just in and near the city of Rome. Out in the provinces, such power as did exist became simply that of these Germanic tribes who occupied the provinces. Odoacer, a chief of the alliance of tribes, had deposed the last Roman emperor of the West, Romulus Augustus. Remember, I said that in 470 AD. Instead of claiming the title of an emperor for himself, he was acclaimed king of Italy by his soldiers, and that title he took. Consequently, there is the final total end of the western portion of the Roman Empire. So Odoacer, he conquered Romulus Augustus, didn't even kill him. He just said, just go home. And they're like, oh, he's like, I don't need the crown. They're all like, you're the king of Italy. He's like, okay, whatever. And that officially is the death of pagan Roman Empire. But remember, that deadly wound was healed. Mm-hmm. And it's still in operation today. And actually, in a large extent, it does control the Stone Kingdom as well. So this northwestern third of it had reached extinction. Thus, a third of the sun, the empire itself. Now, we can understand, if we understand the sun, because there's only the sun. But Christians today, they would rather believe alchemists, right? Copernicus and Newton and what's the others? Kepler and the rest of these warlocks that they don't understand. They think the sun equals a sun, which equals a star. And that star is at least 100 times bigger than the Earth, and the Earth's a globe, and this is the Earth's a globe, and then the Earth's spinning around the sun. And that's all paganism. It's heathenism. That's all it is.
Lies. It's all lies.
Lies, yeah. It's satanic. So continuing, but we understand, when we understand the biblical mindset about the sun, we can understand that the Roman Empire, which is all about sun worship, well, that sun became darkened. We're like, oh, I can understand that because the sun's been darkened physically, so I can understand as above, so below. It happens in heaven. It represents things on earth. Mm-hmm. So continuing here, this northwestern third of it had reached extinction. Thus, a third of the sun, the empire itself, was darkened. A third of the moon, remember the moon is a feminine light, the ruling power of the emperor was lost. And a third of the stars, the important people, the princes and generals and those in authority, had lost that authority. Now, there remained roughly 2/3 in the area of the empire still under the control, nominally at least, subordinate to Constantinople. But here, 1/3, as it points out, had simply reached total destruction. This western part of the empire completely ceased to be in that period. Thus, you can see that the symbolism of it portrays accurately what actually happened. Now, in the Old Testament, very little of prophecy was given in that form. Mostly of it was a plain statement of what was going to happen. Here, the prophecy is given in symbolic form, but as you can see, that symbolism was accurate. It was true prophecy. So remember that it took a little bit longer for Constantinople to collapse. Remember that, because it was a Byzantine. Mm-hmm. It was an amazing fortress. It was almost impenetrable. So we see, and eventually I think the Turks.
Muslims took it over. Now they got all the Muslim flags hanging in.
Yeah, the Turks are the one. The Turks were mighty fighters, right? Can they see that, Steve, where my finger is?
Uh-huh.
All right. No, wasn't the middle finger. I wasn't just. Anyway, moving on. All right. So continuing here about this aspect here. We see that we have been studying the book of Revelation, and we have gotten through the first 4 trumpets, right? We're looking at the trumpets being blown in Genesis and now in Revelation chapter 8. Mm-hmm. Did we finish that chapter, Stephen?
No, we got one more verse.
Okay.
It's at 8:13. Says, and I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of earth, by reason of their voices of the trumpet of the 3 angels, which are yet to sound.
Okay.
So I think this angel was giving a warning to everybody going, hey,
it's coming.
There's 3 more.
Wait, you haven't seen anything yet.
You haven't seen it yet.
We have been studying the book of Revelation, and we've gotten through the first 4 of the 7 trumpets. The 4th trumpet, you will remember, and the things that were given in symbols following the blowing of that trumpet signified the extinguishment of the power and glory of the empire of Rome, at least the western part of it, the real Roman Empire. Then immediately after, as Stephen said, read in Revelation 8, verse 13, there's a big warning, right, to the inhabitants of the earth, right? And we notice that during this time, a map in 1918 of the old world, right? This is Clarence Larkin's 1918 map of the old Roman Empire. Stephen, can they see that?
Yep.
Right? So you can see that. That's a map of the old Roman Empire of the earth. Remember that it talks about a tax from Caesar went to tax all the earth. Well, that's the earth that's mentioned during Christ's time, because they weren't taxing the people in China and India and Tibet and things like that. They weren't taxing them. So continuing here, we see that henceforth the events that were prophesied and the symbolism among these first 4 trumpets were things which were disastrous. Yet apparently something even worse was yet to come with the next 3. All right, now we're in chapter 9. Chapter 9, verses 1. Chapter 9, verses 1 through 12. I might stop here as we're reading, Stephen, but that's we have.
And the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto earth. And to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace. And the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth. And unto them was given power as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, nor any green thing, nor any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but they should torment 5 months. And their torment was the torment of a scorpion when it striketh a man, when he striketh a man. And in those days men shall seek death. In those days shall men seek death and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were the faces of men. And they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth as the teeth of lions, and they had breastplates as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings were as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle, and the tails like unto scorpions. And there were stings in their tails, and the power was to hurt men 5 months. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, or a bad one. But in the Greek tongue, his name is Apollyon. Apollyon.
Mm-hmm.
1 woe is past, and behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter.
Okay, so that's quite a it's quite a lot of stuff going on. So this is the 5th trumpet. Now this is also known as the first woe. This is a description of the rise of Mohammedanism. Yes. Mohammedanism or Islam under the Arabs or Saracen Empire, who invaded and conquered 1/3 of the old Roman Empire in 612 to 762 AD. They conquered the south of and southeast third of the Roman Empire. Caliph founded Baghdad in 762 AD. We see that 5 months, as Stephen read in Revelation chapter 9, verse 5, is 150 days or 150 prophetic years. This was a time of the supremacy of Islamic power. 612 AD, Muhammad begins his mission. 150 years, Arabia, Palestine, Syria, Egypt, Spain, and North Africa were conquered. 762, Arab aggression stopped, and the Muslims moved their capital back to Baghdad after being defeated by Charles Martel in 732 AD. The star equals Muhammad, king over them. His name was Abaddon, meaning destroyer, or Apollyon, destroyer. And bear in mind that God is still worshipped today, Apollyon, or you might want to call it Apollo. Apollo, the sun god, that's who the Freemasons worship, and that's what was the moon missions were after. And you notice that moon is dealing with, in Freemasonry, under the Shinars and Shinard, Shriners, excuse me, not Shinar, but Shriners. All of that stuff, you know, these Freemasons, their god is Lucifer. And so continuing here, obviously none of this can be taken literally. As Stephen read from 1 to 12 of chapter 9, none of this can be taken literally. Thus the question is, what does the symbolism here represent? That star falling to earth was evidently a rebellious angel. Compare this, for example, with Revelation 12 verses 3 and 4, where John said, what did he see? He saw a great red dragon in heaven, and his tail drew the 3rd part of the stars of heaven and did cast them to the earth. In other words, Satan, in his rebellion, got exactly a third of the angels to follow him. And they were driven out of heaven and cast to the earth. Then, with the same symbolism here, it is evident that this was one of the rebellious angels that was doing this so. So he opened the pit of the abyss, and smoke pours out and darkens the sun and the air. We saw previously when we were dealing with the seals that when one of those seals was opened, the sun and the moon and the stars were darkened a third of the time. Of course, the sun there represented the glory and power of imperial Rome. Now, the western part of the Roman Empire had already had its complete collapse and destruction under the things told in the first four trumpets. I believe that ended in 476 AD. That's secular history of the end of the pagan Roman Empire. Therefore, what we are coming to here is obviously the remainder of the old Roman Empire. We saw that the northwesterly third of the empire, taking in all the European parts of it, west of the Balkan nations, had been taken over by the tribes of Israel, the former Scythian tribes, as they moved in. Thus, there was lost now a southerly third, North Africa, and then an easterly third, taking in Palestine, Syria, and the Balkan countries. Hence, it is evident that this remainder of the Roman Empire is being dealt with here. The easterly portion of the Roman Empire, with its capital at Constantinople, while it had the name Roman, basically there weren't too many Romans there. It was Greek. It was Greek. You remember that the Greek cities had expanded colonies in Asia Minor. It had almost established an empire of their own. Therefore, before Rome conquered it and took it away from them. So this is pretty exciting about the Roman Empire. But ladies and gentlemen, the Turks were a mighty force. A mighty force. And we're going to learn all about this in the next video. God bless you. And let's just pick it up in the next video. Thank you. Come to Jesus. Amen.